Welcome to this edition of
Staff Talk!
Perfect. Welcome to this first episode of Staff Talks. You might see that we're missing a staff member. Tiffany's at home because Craig's not feeling well, so she's just being careful, making sure he's okay. So you might check on them and tell them you love them. So it's me and Virginia today. Say hi, Virginia.
Hi.
And we're going to try, while we're on this separation from each other, to try to bring you something at least to make you think. I want to start by saying that we don't have to agree on all things to love each other or even to be a church together. And if you see this or any of these things we talk about and you disagree with us, it's okay. It's really okay. And part of what we want to do is to make people think, to have you explore your faith and to give it thought and move from there. So we're going to start this week with a topic that's probably not too controversial. I'm sure some people have different opinions on it, but I don't think it's not a make or break theological problem for most people. And that is it okay to get a tattoo? And I want to start by saying thanks to Adam Hamilton, who we're using kind of his book, Making Sense of the Bible, as a basis. In the end of it, there are about 15 or 20 chapters where he deals with difficult passages. So the staff and I are reading those together as a group, the chapters. We're talking about them, and then we're coming to you to talk about them. And we'd love your questions either before or after. We'll try to answer the ones after tonight, next week at the beginning. But you also can send them in ahead of time. And if you want to, we can get you a copy. I have several copies of this at my house. I can leave you one on the front porch or whatever you'd like. We can mail it to you, whatever. Those of you who are my Wednesday night class, some of you have it. But if you want to follow along in the book. So with that being said, our opinions do not constitute those of the United Methodist Church or this church.
Right.
These are our personal opinions today. This is Staff Talk. And so we're going to try to be free to just kind of be honest with you. And hopefully you can be honest with us and we can learn together. So Virginia, tell me what you thought about this week's lesson.
Okay, really, really great. I love Adam Hamilton, first to start off, and it kind of resonates with me, too, because I am a person that does have tattoos. I have 4, actually, and they all hold really great meaning with me. I have one for Scout. It's a butterfly. I have one that's an ichthus fish on my foot that reminds me of my faith. I have Be Still on my wrist, because we all know that I have issues
needs to
being
slow down.
still. Yeah, so that's a good reminder. And then I have a tattoo on my leg that reminds me of my mother and my grandmothers. And so they all hold really great meaning. And again, maybe your opinion is different from mine when it comes to tattoos, but I really like and enjoy mine.
Now, my experience is a little different than Virginia's. I do have a tattoo. Most people laugh at me about it because I got it in college. All of my fraternity brothers were going to, believe it or not, this place called Dr. Rat's. Dr. Rat's Hollywood Tattoo. It's about this big, and you've probably seen it. You maybe seen it on my ankle before. I really wish it weren't there.
It's almost non-existent.
Yeah, it really is. I think about getting it covered up, but to get it covered up would make it bigger. And as a pastor, I guess I'm still from the old school where I don't mind if people have tattoos at all, and I think they're beautiful in some people. It's just, I don't want to be a stumbling block for somebody who, has a problem, with their pastor being that way. And I don't know if that's ridiculous or not, because on one hand, as Christians, we don't want to live our lives beholden to what other people think about us. But at the same time, we have to think about how our message is received by the way that we present ourselves and things like that. And so while I guess on theory, I don't have and I would get a tattoo. I probably would. If that was something that I really felt strongly enough about to remember or something that, then I'm not against it anyway. It's just, I guess, one of the things that we do is we take our cultural norms and we try to find biblical principles to back those cultural norms up. And so the verse that most people associate with this, or that we have trouble with, I'll let Virginia read to us this morning. And Matt, read us a couple of verses before and after.
Okay, so this is from Leviticus, which we all know are like the biblical laws, right? And there's 613.
Written by Moses.
Right? And so we're in the middle-ish of them. And chapter 19. So we'll start at 26. It says, "You shall not eat anything with its blood. You shall not practice augury or witchcraft." In verse 27, it says, "You shall not round off the hair on your temples or mar the edges of your beard." In verse 28, it says, "You shall not make any gashes in your flesh, for the dead or any marks upon you, for I am the Lord. And in 29 it says, do not profane your daughter by making her a prostitute, that the land not become prostituted or full of depravity.
And it goes on to talk about some other great things that you don't want to do, like not cheating people when you're doing business and the way you measure things and all kinds of stuff. Before part the Virginia read, there's a part about when you move into a new land and you plant trees that are fruit bearing, that the fruit is forbidden for 3 years. And then in the 4th year, you give it to the Lord. And then the 5th year, you can eat it. If you know anything about fruit trees, you don't really want to harvest them the first few years. God's, advice through Moses, and Moses just practical about some things. And you got to remember that anytime you're reading a text, you got to think about what's going on in the world around the people that it's being written to. Now, these are the Israelite children. And Adam would say in the book that we as Gentiles are really not held to these laws at all, because in Acts chapter 15, they held basically I guess what we Methodists would call a conference.
Yeah, yeah.
And they took I don't know if they took a vote. They decided that Gentiles would be free from the Jewish law. And so in some ways these don't really apply to us. However, they're good for instruction, instead of seeing these necessaries as laws, they become guides for us as Gentiles. And so in that way, we have to do something that I think people think is a negative thing. And Adam talks about this, the picking and choosing.
Yeah.
You want to say something?
Yeah. Chapter 19, first of all, is titled Ritual and Moral Holiness. And so our morals, we all have different standards of morals. And within the book, Adam Hamilton talks about picking and choosing. Is that where you were talking about it? Picking and choosing, of like how when we hear that, we automatically go, oh no, you can't pick and choose the Bible. But we look at these verses in Leviticus, and how many of you like a really rare steak? Well, 2 verses before this, it talks about not eating a steak that has blood in it. But it's picking and choosing which one of these that you morally identify with.
And you could find people who are against tattoos as Christians. They think that this clearly says that you shouldn't. But I've not seen any of those people also not round the edges of their hair or have ringlets beside their face as a Orthodox Jew might do. And so in that way we pick and choose in that way. And so I guess one of the things that's important for me when you talk about anything like this is it's important when you're picking and choosing to. And that sounds crazy, to make sure that God's in the process, to make sure you're not doing it out of your own cultural biases, out of your own wants and desires, but rather trying to listen for what God wants for you in your life. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's hard to say, yes, okay to have a tattoo, or no, it's not okay to have a tattoo, because I think every situation might be a little bit different. And I think people are different. Right. Like, for instance, my daughter has 3. And the only concern, I told her this, the only concern I have with you has nothing to do with morality, has nothing to do with God. Mm-hmm. It only has to do with a couple of things. One, is it going to affect your ability to get a job someday? Because she wants, you have to be practical, and because culturally we've come a long way about that, but it's still something that could, in particular jobs. I mean, we haven't gotten to where politicians are really
tattooed,
and that's something
really.
that Gwendolyn thinks she wants to do. So, anyways, but at the same time, I see beautiful tattoos and art, and I believe artwork is of God, so one of the things I think it's also important to know is that when they're talking about when one of the things that Moses was almost always writing to do, and when God was giving the laws and these things, is that the Israelites were bad to want what everybody else had around them. Mm-hmm. And this cutting of the flesh was a Canaanite practice, that when Baal would call out, they would gash their flesh, and that there were times that we believe that they marked themselves with tattoos for deities because everybody else around them was polytheistic. And so they sort of chose up their favorite gods, and sometimes they would mark themselves, their bodies, so people knew who the god that they were, worshipped the greatest, things like that. But as far as being a biblical mandate against tattoos, I don't see it that way at all.
No, definitely looking in the world of the text and within the context of the scripture is super important. Right. Like, what was going on then, and why did they choose not to do it, or at least enough to write about how we shouldn't do it. I feel like that's super important.
And the other thing, and I think the second thing I told Gwendolyn was not only how it affects her job or her I guess employability, was does anything that she would put on her body cause her to make it harder to love God or to love her neighbor? And I guess Adam talks about this. Sometimes motive is just as important as what it is that you're. So it's not even so much about whether it's a tattoo or not, but it's why you're doing it. There are people who tattoo their body out of self-harm because it hurts and it's a way to get the pain. I don't know that I don't know how I feel about self-harm. I know I don't like self-harm. I don't know how I feel about tattooing in those kinds of ways. I guess the thing is that it's like it always comes down to when this is not one of those live or die issues.
Right.
Believe what you believe with all your heart and practice it, but also remember you could be wrong, and that that leaves room for you not to judge other people.
Right.
And it used to be that if you had tattoos, you were trashy. Back when I was a kid, you just didn't do that.
Right,
I mean,
right.
now everybody has them, and I think they're beautiful, and
Yeah.
and some of them look really nice, and so it's I'm sure we're going to be split on the older generation, younger generation
Right.
thing on this, and I kind of feel like halfway in between because I'm still stuck in that old way that's kind of like, I'd really like to get something for my mom and dad to cover up this stupid little Kappa Sigma. I mean, it's so ugly, and to cover it up, but I don't want to be any bigger so that as a pastor I'd be a stumbling block for somebody, which is ridiculous because
Right.
But it's that balance between not caring what people think about you, but at the same time caring what people
Right.
think about, because that's what Adam says. He says you got to ask yourself, is what I'm doing, and that's not just about tattoos, it's what I'm doing making it harder for me to love God and to love my neighbor.
Right. It's funny because my mom has the exact same opinion that Adam Hamilton does within the finishing of this chapter, and that's, at least from a youth minister's perspective, is that God gave us 10 laws, right? Really important ones, and so one of those top 10 is honor your father and mother. So again, from a teenager's perspective, if you are still living in your parents' home under your parents' dime and they choose to say, hey, no, I don't want you to get a tattoo, then hey, don't get a tattoo, okay? Move out. So when you move out of your parents' house eventually and you have your own job and it's your choice to do it, hey, that's great. Get a tattoo. Make sure it has meaning because it's going to be with you for the rest of your life. So it's kind of a big deal.
And I think we do need to talk about one more last thing. It says in there, do not mark your body for the dead. And then it says, do not tattoo. And I don't think those are always kind of put together. And I'm not sure they always are, because a lot of time the marking for the dead was not necessarily even putting a mark on your body to remember, but to gouge yourself. There were these like remembrance things that where they would hurt themselves, and at least for what we read. And so I'm not sure that those two can always be taken together, even though they always are.
Right.
Don't gouge your body and don't mark with tattoos being held together.
Right.
So
after watching this, it'd be awesome if you want to share your tattoo. Like when we post this, just share it in the comments and like tell us the story of why you chose to get that tattoo. We would all love to see it and to hear your story.
Because my guess is that 99% of the tattoos that are gotten have been gotten out of some sort of love. Mm-hmm. Either silly enough to put their loved one's name on there, whoever they love, down to somebody they've lost, down to somebody they admire, down to some phrase that means something about love and life. And it's amazing. I mean, the majority of them are. And there's some really cool things going out there. There are people who are tattoo artists who will cover up hate tattoos for free.
For free, yeah.
Which is really
awesome.
cool. So if you have any questions or other comments, we're not here as experts. We're just here talking as staff and friend, and hope that you learn something and maybe we can grow together. Now, we haven't decided next week's topic, so we're going to sign off now, but I'm going to leave you with the topic for next week. Next week's topic is from chapter 25 in the book on page 243. Did Jesus really say that? Where all the sayings of Jesus really that are credited to him, did he really say them? Where do they come from? Sources. I think you'll find some of that very interesting things, things that Virginia's learning about in seminary now.
Right. Yeah.
And so we look to see you next week, and you can start sending your questions about that. Did Jesus really say that? And also, I want to say an exciting announcement. If we can do it, and I think we can. On Easter, we're going to have drive-up church here at BB First United Methodist Church. We'll have a platform up here by I'm guessing near the awning, and we'll fan you out in cars, and we have a transmitter that will transmit to a radio station.
You don't even have to get out of your car.
Yeah. You can come in your pajamas, but we thought at Easter at least we should be together and we should be able to see each other, even though we're protected by the cars and all that stuff. I'm also going to invite you to think about preparing to be able to bring your own communion elements. Bring just a small, you can just get out of piece of white bread is fine. and some grape juice that you can find, or something similar. It's really okay. I'll bless those remotely from outside your car, and we'll be able to share communion together. In fact, next Sunday on my Sunday live, not this Sunday, but next Sunday, the first Sunday of the month, we'll probably do virtual communion over the thing. I had a talk with a bishop over Zoom yesterday, and he gave us permission to virtually bless
That is cool.
elements during this time. He said extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. And so we appreciate you, and I look forward to this each week, and we might even do it more than once a week. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
We'll just see. We miss you, Tiffany. We're sorry you're not here with us. Our very first staff talk ever. Welcome to this edition of
Staff Talk.
Nope. Wait. Welcome to this edition of
Staff Talk.
Welcome to this edition of
Staff Talk.
You either get